All right, so far we've talked about what happens when light rays hit a plane mirror. So what happens when light rays hit curved mirrors? Now there are a couple of different kinds of curved mirrors that we're going to look at. Now we've already talked about plane mirrors, so let's just ignore those for now. There are two types of curved mirrors that we can talk about. One is called concave and the other is called convex. So if you look at this one here, it's called a concave mirror. This is the reflective surface on this side of it. One of the ways you can remember it is it kind of looks like it's caving in. All right. Now, when light rays come in and hit a concave mirror, if they're coming in parallel to each other, you'll notice when it hits the surface of the mirror, the surface of this mirror isn't straight up and down. It's on an angle. So that means that when the light rays hit it, they're going to bounce off at an angle towards here, and this one's going to bounce off at an angle towards here. Now, recall that if we're going to figure out where a reflected ray is going to go, we're going to need normals to do it. So we've got normals here that are exactly 90 degrees to the surface of the mirror here. They will be different depending on where you are. So this normal is at this angle. It is at 90 degrees to the surface of the mirror at this position. So depending on where you are on the mirror, the normal is going to point in a different direction. So now that we have those normals in there, we can put in our reflected rays. And you'll notice that these reflected rays kind of bounce back in towards the middle. So that's why this type of a mirror is called a converging mirror, because those light rays come in, hit the mirror, and then they converge on a point somewhere in the middle. All right. The other type is a convex mirror. All right, so this is the reflective surface here. So if I have light rays coming in from the left-hand side again, when they hit this surface of the mirror here, you can probably tell what's going to happen. If I draw in some normals in here, and again, 90 degrees to the surface here, 90 degrees to the surface here, you can see that those light rays are going to spray out. All right, that's why this is called a diverging mirror. So we have three types of mirrors now. We have the plane mirrors that are just flat. We have a concave that's kind of caved in. It's called a converging mirror because all of the light rays that hit it bounce back towards the middle. And then we have this third called a convex mirror, also called a diverging mirror because when the light rays hit it, they will spread out. All right. So where do those curves come from? Well, those curves are actually just parts of a giant sphere, or like a ball. All right. If you were to extend the mirrors out, so here we have a convex mirror. So we've got the surface out here is the reflective surface. If we just kept drawing the surface, it would just keep going around and around and around, and eventually it would come back to the beginning, right? We'd end up creating a sphere. And we can do the same thing with a concave mirror as well. So here is the inner reflective surface. If we extend it, it would just keep going around and around and come back. So when we're drawing a curved mirror, what we're actually doing is drawing a small part of a larger sphere. And because we have this known shape, we can actually figure out where the actual center of that sphere would be. And that center of the sphere is something that we can actually use later on. So to summarize, a concave mirror or converging mirror is a mirror that's shaped like the part of the surface of a sphere in which the inner surface is reflective. And then a convex mirror or diverging mirror is a mirror shaped like the part of the surface of a sphere in which the outer surface is reflective. Okay, so let's look specifically at some concave mirrors. Now, there are going to be some key terms we're going to need to know in order to understand what is happening when we are looking at a concave mirror. So I have drawn here a concave mirror, and a couple of things have been labeled on here. All right, so the first one we're going to look at is C, and that's just the center of the sphere. All right, so that sphere we were talking about in the last slide, where if you extended it out, it would just make a big ball. That C is the center of curvature of that particular mirror. All right, so that would be the center of the mirror. Now, if I were to draw a line straight through the center of curvature to the mirror, that is what's called the principal axis. So any line that goes through the C and hits the mirror can be used as a principal axis. So I could draw the line here. I could draw the line here. I could draw the line here. It doesn't matter. As long as it's a straight line that goes through the center of curvature and then hits the mirror, it's called the principal axis. Now, where that principal axis actually hits the mirror is what's called the vertex. Right? Now, if we were to throw some light rays in here, so I've got a whole bunch of light rays, and again, as we've been saying repeatedly, We're putting on the arrowheads to indicate the direction of travel. And now you can start to see why it's important to have those arrowheads on here, because things are going to start getting a little convoluted. It's going to get a little bit harder to see what's going on if you just have a whole bunch of lines. If you have those arrowheads on there, you can tell light is traveling in this direction, so that means it's bouncing off here. And you can see an arrowhead showing that as well. All right, so by using these arrowheads, it makes it a lot easier to figure out which direction light is traveling. And that's going to be very important when we try to find images in these mirrors. So if I have a whole bunch of light rays coming in parallel, you'll notice they all bounce back to this one point. And that point is what's called the focus. All right, so that's the point where the light rays that are parallel to the principal axis meet after they've been reflected off the mirror. So light rays come in, they bounce back, they go through the focus. So this one comes in, bounce back through the focus. This one comes in, bounces back through the focus. They all will cross paths there. All right, that distance from the vertex to the focus is what's called the focal length. All right, so the distance from the mirror to F is called the focal length. So that's represented usually with a lowercase f. And that's not really going to come up when we're talking about mirrors, but when we start talking about lenses, it will become much more important. Now, something to notice is that the distance from the mirror to this focal point is exactly halfway to the center of curvature. All right, so f, this lowercase f distance, is half the distance to the center of curvature. And this f and 2f will become very important again when we talk about lenses later on. But it's a really important point to notice right now. That center of curvature of the sphere, halfway between the center and the mirror, is where we find that focal point. All right, so we're going to talk about the rules for rays in converging mirrors. To do this, we're going to switch to a paper drawing. So we'll flip over to that now. All right, let's go through the rules for rays in converging or concave mirrors. There are 4 what are called the principal rays that we're going to be talking about. We're going to look at 4 rays that have very specific rules that involve them. All right, so the first one we're going to do using red pen is a ray parallel to the principal axis reflects back through the focal point. All right, so here we have our curved mirror. Here we have our principal axis. All right, and we have a couple of points marked off on this line. F is the focal point, C is the center of curvature. Now a reminder, the C of the center of curvature comes from this mirror. If we extended it out and made it a giant sphere, that would be the center of that giant sphere, okay? And then F, this focal point, is exactly halfway between the mirror and the center of curvature. Now where this principal axis crosses the mirror, it's marked with a V here, that is our vertex, okay? So again, our first ray, we have a ray parallel to the principal axis. So we'll have a ray come in from way over here, and it comes along parallel to the principal axis. Now, a reminder, as before, we need to show the direction of travel of these rays. Now, previously, any kind of drawings we did, we had a single source of light in the middle, and then the rays were coming out. Now, we're gonna have rays going all over the place, all right? It's gonna make things really complicated if you're not paying attention and not keeping track of where all those rays are going. So make sure you keep the direction of travel on the ray. So this one is coming in parallel to the principal axis. That means it's going to reflect back off of the mirror through the focus, all right? So again, make sure there's an arrow on there indicating the direction of travel. So this is ray number 1. So ray number 2, we're gonna do using blue. And ray number 2 is a ray passing through the center of curvature will reflect straight back. So if I have a ray going through C and hitting the mirror, it doesn't matter where I point it, it can go into any direction, it's gonna bounce straight back. All right, so if I start it from out here and bring it in to the mirror, so again, our direction of travel, make sure we're indicating what direction that ray is traveling, it's gonna bounce straight back through. So I can then say, oh, it's not just going one direction, it's actually going in 2 directions here. All right, so this ray is ray number 2. And that goes into the mirror and then straight back out to the center of curvature. Our third ray, if we have a ray passing through the focus, it will reflect back parallel to the principal axis. So if I have a ray that, say, for example, comes up here, so it starts from way over here somewhere and comes up through the focus. And once again, don't forget to include the direction that that ray is traveling. It will bounce back parallel to the principal axis. All right, so including our direction arrow, something you might notice, so this is ray number 3. Something you might notice about rays 1 and 3, they're basically the exact reverse of each other. So in ray 1, it was parallel to the principal axis, it went back through the focus. In ray 3, it went through the focus and bounces back parallel to the principal axis. All right, and then finally, ray number 4, if we have a ray that is aimed at the vertex, so if it hits right here, right where that principal axis meets the mirror, it's going to follow the law of reflection. And that law, if you all remember, is the angle of incidence will equal the angle of reflection. So if I bring this ray in, we're going to use orange or yellow for that. So it comes up here. Now for this, we should be using a protractor. Now, this is where the principal axis becomes really helpful, because before it was really easy to tell where the normal was, because we always measured the angle of incidence from the normal to the incident ray, and then we would measure the reflected, or the angle of reflection from the normal to the reflected ray. But in this, using a curved surface, it's really hard to figure out what the normal is unless we point it right at that principal axis. If we have a line that goes through the center and hits the mirror, it is always going to hit it at exactly 90 degrees. So if you look here, it's hitting at 90 degrees. This ray here is hitting at 90 degrees. That's why it went straight back. If I had another ray that went here, it would bounce straight back, right? So wherever we create this principal axis, when it goes through the center of curvature and hits that surface of the mirror, it's always going to be 90 degrees. So that makes it really easy for us to come in here and measure, well, the angle of incidence is, let's say, about 42.5 degrees. So I can come back here on the other side and I can measure 10, 20, 30, 40, about 2.5 right there. And I can draw the reflected ray. All right, so that is ray number 4. So those are the four principal rays for dealing with a converging. All right, so what are some practical applications for concave mirrors? Why would we need this? Well, there are a couple of situations where you could use this. Number one is if you have a source of light at the focal point. Well, if you have a source of light at the focal point, light rays will travel off in all directions. And in particular, with a curved mirror, when a light ray comes out and hits the surface of the mirror from the focal point, it will bounce back parallel. So by having a small light source here, shining light towards the mirror, all of those rays will bounce straight out. So you'll end up with a wide beam of light rays coming out from it. And that's how a searchlight works, right? So if you take a look at the searchlight, right in the middle here, we have a tiny little light that is shining light rays out towards all areas of the surface of this mirror, and they will all bounce out parallel to each other and create a large beam of bright light. The other application is going in the reverse. So having a source of light far away and having all of that light come in parallel, those light rays will bounce back through the focal point. And that's how telescopes work, all right? So when we use a telescope, we are looking at a source of light far, far away. That light will come in, hit the surface of the mirror, and all the light rays will focus in on one small part. And so we can position a lens, or we can position a camera or something in around this position that will allow us to actually get an image of what that faraway object actually is. Right? So next thing to talk about is convex mirrors. We've already looked at the basics to them. If light ray comes in, it will cause the light rays to bounce off into spread out into other directions. So the parallel rays that strike the mirror are reflected away from the principal axis, which is the opposite of what happens in our concave mirrors. In convex mirrors, we have a virtual focus, because if all of these light rays are spreading out, that means they're never going to actually meet anywhere. All right, so there's nowhere for those to meet. But if we extend those reflected rays back, we can actually find a focal point on the other side. And surprise, surprise, this focal point will be exactly halfway to the center of curvature of this convex mirror. All right, so let's take a look at the rules for rays in diverging mirrors. We're once again going to switch to doing this on paper. All right, let's take a look at the rays in diverging mirrors, in convex mirrors. Okay, so reminder, convex mirror is going to be shaped so that it curves away from the direction of travel of the light rays. So the light rays are going to come from over here and hit the outer surface of this mirror. We have our principal axis going along here. We have a focal point on this side of the mirror, and we have a center of curvature on this side of the mirror. So unlike what we saw with concave mirrors, the focus and the center of curvature are on the opposite side of the mirror. They're behind the mirror, okay? So our first ray is going to go from over here, and it's going to come in parallel to the principal axis, just like we saw with the other video. All right, as always, make sure you have the arrow on there indicating the direction of travel. Now, in a concave mirror, this would reflect back into the focal point, but the focal point isn't on this side of the mirror. And if we remember what a convex mirror or diverging mirror looks like, this ray is actually going to bounce out somewhere over here. And in fact, where it bounces out is actually lined up perfectly with the focal point on the other side. So if we draw a little dotted line here to where we hit the surface of the mirror, we can then figure out exactly where our reflected ray goes. All right, so that is ray number one. Ray number two, if we aim a ray directly at the center of curvature, it's going to bounce straight back. So we're going to use a blue pen for this one. So if I start somewhere over here and I take my starting point around here, it's going to hit the mirror. And just to show where it's lined up, we're going to extend this back here, right through the center. All right, so when it travels inwards, we have our arrow indicating that it's going to hit the surface of the mirror, then it's going to bounce straight back right along the same line. Okay, so that is ray number two. And then finally, ray number three, if we aim it at the virtual focus, it's going to reflect back parallel to the principal axis. So if I start somewhere over here, for example, and I aim directly at the focus on the other side of the mirror, so if I go along here, and then I'm going to use my dotted line to indicate it travels, or it's coming from there, or it's heading towards there. So once again, we put the arrow in to show the direction of travel, and this is going to reflect back exactly parallel to the principal axis. So just like what we saw with concave mirrors, where when you went through the focus, it reflected back parallel to the principal axis, or if it went parallel to the principal axis, it would reflect back through the focus. We have the same idea here. All right, so if we have a ray coming in parallel to the principal axis, it's going to reflect out like it was coming from the focus. Or if we have going into the focus, it's going to reflect back parallel to the principal axis. So just like what we saw in concave mirrors, these are kind of reverse of each other. All right, so there's ray number 3.